Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. Some of you may recall that in the fall of 2014, in order to present or support our preparations for the bid to host the 35th America's Cup, we produced a projected economic impact analysis. This analysis examined projected revenues and expenditures over a 2.5-year period. In round numbers, those projections forecast a potential investment of $77 million, generating approximately $250 million in additional economic activity for the island as a result of hosting the America's Cup. More recently, in October of 2015, Bermuda successfully hosted a Louis Vuitton America's Cup World Series. This dramatic event provided residents and visitors with a taste of the excitement that will come in 2017, but it also gave us a snapshot of the potential economic impact that hosting the America's Cup is having on Bermuda. The ACBDA team has undertaken a review of the economic impact of that October World Series. The report was produced by a consultant seconded to the ACBDA by a local accounting firm. Today, I am pleased to introduce the report, but first of all, I'd like to make a couple of observations. More than 10,000 people attended the event village on Front Street throughout the weekend, where they were treated to a host of local products, entertainment, food, and family activities provided by Bermuda suppliers and vendors. On the Sunday, an estimated 550 boats holding some 5,000 spectators took to the waters of the Great Sound, where they witnessed spectacular racing under almost perfect conditions. Sir Russell Coutts, the CEO of the America's Cup Event Authority, said that Bermuda's Super Sunday illustrated exactly why Bermuda was chosen as the host venue for the America's Cup in 2017. It was truly an amazing weekend that exceeded many people's expectations. But we have to ask, was it an economic success? And the answer is yes, and here's why. First, $8.6 million was injected into our economy by the event, with 70% of that coming from overseas sources, including visitor spending. Second, there were many Bermudian beneficiaries of this economic stimulus, including restaurants, retailers, hotels, taxi drivers, security firms, boat charters, hospitality workers, plus many small business owners and entrepreneurs. And third, the international media coverage delivered a global audience of over 8 million total viewers, representing what's known as an equivalent advertising value of some $14.1 million, which was a huge positive contribution to Bermuda's international visibility in major tourism markets. Our original forecast for the October World Series event, prepared in 2014 before we won the bid, projected an additional spending impact of only $1.7 million. The current report, measuring economic activity created from this event, estimates the actual spending at $8.6 million. In other words, the actual returns far exceeded initial projections. This is clearly a very good result that builds on the overall benefit of hosting the America's Cup, the teams, and all the related events. The important thing to remember about these numbers is they represent just one part of the ongoing impact of the America's Cup on Bermuda. This is a 2.5-year journey that began with the announcement of Bermuda as a host in 2014 and continues through the activities in 2017 and the legacy value beyond. The economic benefit of the Louis Vuitton America's Cup World Series, while important, is only part of the impact. The sense of collective energy and excitement and the pride we all shared at having been challenged with a difficult task and then exceeding expectations is something we cannot value in economic terms, and it's important throughout the community. We're happy to share with the people of Bermuda the economic data that has been collected about the event. And I'd now like to welcome to the podium Mr. Peter Durhager, who is chairman of the ACBDA, who will provide additional detail on the report and the economic impact of the World Series in October of 2015.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the board, team, and volunteers of America's Cup Bermuda, I'm pleased to present the review of the economic impact of the Louis Vuitton America's Cup World Series event held in Bermuda from October 16th to 18th, 2015. This review is not intended to be a full economic impact assessment. It is intended to highlight the first-level data captured in order to evaluate the success of the World Series Bermuda. We have only focused on economic activity that can be directly attributed to this event and have not considered any secondary or indirect economic benefits that might ordinarily be accounted for in a full economic assessment. In this light, this assessment can be considered conservative. We would like to acknowledge the associations, businesses, and individuals who gathered or provided the information necessary to produce the review. To them all, we are sincerely grateful. There are three areas I will focus on today, and they are: first, how the economic activity was generated or where the money came from; secondly, how the money was spent and the cash flowed into Bermuda's economy; and thirdly, the media exposure that Bermuda received as a result of the event. In terms of overall economic activity, the impact of the Louis Vuitton America's Cup World Series event came from a variety of sources, including spending by traveling fans and other visitors, competitor teams, the America's Cup commercial partners and sponsors, the international media, the Bermuda general public, the America's Cup Event Authority, America's Cup Bermuda, the government of Bermuda, and various related entities. As the minister mentioned, we estimate that the event generated $8.6 million in economic activity. Where did this money come from? In the first instance, visitor spending. Approximately $6.1 million, or 70% of the total spend, was injected into Bermuda's economy from overseas sources. The types of services America's Cup visitors consumed while in Bermuda include hotel rooms, restaurant meals, corporate hospitality events, transportation, charter boats, shopping at the event village, and other retailers. These figures include only spending which occurred in Bermuda to Bermuda parties. As such, it represents direct investment into the Bermuda economy. In terms of local spending, the event also generated spending by Bermuda entities in relation to staging the America's Cup concert, the infrastructure investment by telecommunications providers to increase bandwidth for the event, hosting of the event in terms of the social, operational, and technical support by Bermuda public bodies. This outlay by Bermuda parties is estimated at $1.2 million, and when combined with expenditure from overseas parties, generated $7.3 million spent within Bermuda, which would otherwise not have occurred. In terms of general public spending, it's more difficult to measure local expenditure by the general public in relation to the event for fundamentally two reasons. The first being that we did not have the benefit of a comprehensive survey to capture this data, but secondly, it's difficult to assess whether spending by the general public was specifically due to the World Series itself or may have incurred in any event, either at that time or at some other time. But here's what we do know. Local banks reported an additional $4.7 million in spending during the World Series week, as compared to an average week in October. Using measures to ensure a fair and prudent estimate, we have only included a total of $1.3 million of general public spending in the final figure of $8.6 million, another indication of the conservative approach to this report. Bermuda costs and revenue. Of course, there were various costs incurred and revenue earned by Bermuda public bodies in staging the event. Of course, we estimate total cost to be $916,000, and the direct government revenue of $281,000, resulting in a net cost to Bermuda of $635,000. These costs included security, clearing of the Hamilton docks and the event village, event staging, telecommunications, floating docks, utilities, waste management, equipment rentals, insurance, and health and safety. The revenue was generated principally through airport taxes, hotel occupancy taxes, and the tourism levy. In the discussion of cost, it's important that we acknowledge the contribution of Bermuda's volunteers, who committed their time and talent to delivering the event. We estimate that over 4,000 hours were volunteered, and that the value of that time, plus the value of waived fees and charges, is approximately $600,000. While that value is not factored into the economic impact, it represents a significant reduction in the operating costs, and our sincere appreciation goes out to those who contributed to the success of the event. In terms of comparison to the original economic impact assessment or forecast that the minister mentioned, the estimated budget of $77 million included a provision of $500,000 in net costs relating to hosting the World Series event. As indicated previously, the actual net cost was approximately $635,000. The additional cost can be attributed to the increased scale and activities surrounding the event. This increased scale significantly generated more economic activity than projected. The original forecast called for $1.7 million in economic activity, and the actual figure is estimated at 8.6. To summarize, an additional $135,000 was spent, and a further $6.9 million was generated over the original forecast. In terms of the flow of cash into the system, the economic activity created by the Louis Vuitton America's Cup World Series produced revenue for a wide spectrum of the Bermuda economy, and specifically in important areas of our tourism industry and local retailers, service providers, and entrepreneurs. I'll now detail how some of the money generated by the event flowed through the Bermuda economy. Tourism impact. An estimated 1,499 visitors came to Bermuda for the event. This represented an 18% increase compared to a typical week in October. These visitors accounted for 3,730 hotel room nights and $2.6 million in hotel revenue, which is a 43% increase compared to a typical week in October. Importantly, this figure does not include team members from Oracle Team USA, Artemis Racing, and SoftBank Team Japan who are already resident in Bermuda. For local business impact, where possible, we have identified revenue generated by the many service providers and entrepreneurs engaged in the production of the event. Some of the highlights include $300,000 in charter boat revenue, including an America's Cup charter of 2 public ferries, which took 530 school children to see the races for free. $320,000 in revenue by the Event Village vendors. $1.5 million in retail sales according to the October Retail Sales Index. $400,000 in additional revenue for restaurants, which represents an average increase of 25% over regular activity. And $2.8 million for event production services, including $2.1 million spent by the America's Cup Event Authority on services including hospitality, catering, printing, event staging, audio and video, team setup, promotion, and entertainment. Turning to media exposure, one of the benefits identified to Bermuda for hosting the America's Cup was the global media coverage. The World Series has provided an excellent indication of how that exposure is impacting Bermuda. An independent report commissioned by the America's Cup Event Authority indicated a total television audience of 8.1 million, including 1.4 million viewers of the live and tape-delayed broadcasts of the races, and 6.7 million viewers were reached through other television coverage, including TV and sports magazine programs. From that total figure, almost 2 million viewers were reached in the UK, almost 4 million across Europe, and 350,000 in the United States. The report also assigned an equivalent advertising value of $14.1 million for this level of media coverage. In terms of social media impact, it's interesting to note that the report also covered social media data for the America's Cup in 2015, where 71 million impressions on the America's Cup Facebook page, 10.8 million impressions through America's Cup Twitter account, and videos of the event in Bermuda generated over 2 million views on both Facebook and YouTube. This does not include activity on social media pages of the 6 competing teams. In wrapping up this review, I'm happy to report that the Louis Vuitton America's Cup World Series exceeded our expectations. A simple but useful way in evaluating the costs described versus the revenue generated is that Bermuda public bodies invested approximately $600,000 to create $8.6 million, which flowed through our economy in a wide variety of transactions, and where a full 70% of that was derived from overseas spending. More importantly, it delivered tangible revenue to the sectors of our economy that were identified as most likely to benefit from hosting the event. Specifically, tourism, retail, local service providers, and entrepreneurs. This activity, coupled with the $14.1 million of value in media exposure, illustrate the significant impact of the event and represents an excellent return on investment. Thank you.
Questions?
Hi.
Afternoon.
There's quite a disparity between the original projection that you had for this event and the actual revenues brought in. Has this exercise given you more ambitious projections for the actual final event in 2017?
Well, we'd like to think it would be quadrupled, but I think Bermuda has sort of a natural carrying capacity in terms of the number of hotel rooms and just our ability to be able to handle sort of large volumes. So I think what it showed to us was that we were conservative originally, and I think we obviously believe that based on the success of the World Series event in October, we hope that we'll see even more dramatic sort of and exciting racing in 2017. It's hard at this point to estimate what the increase may or may not be. Obviously, there are a lot of months between now and then, but I think obviously we're optimistic. But I think it would be incorrect to say that we expect a multiple of what we estimated simply because Bermuda has a natural carrying capacity.
Okay, one more question. Any idea where this extra income is to be invested? This 8.6 million. What's going to happen with it? Is it going to go back into the America's Cup? Or?
Well, no. I think the point of the 8.6 million is it went into the pockets of hospitality workers. It went into hotels. It went into taxi drivers' pockets. It essentially got spread throughout the community, which was the whole point behind the America's Cup in the beginning, to spread the benefits as broadly as possible. I think the other thing that Peter mentioned was the extraordinary visibility we got out of it. When you consider the amount of almost free advertising, that they have a way of assessing what the economic equivalents might be, and that was about 14 million if the Bermuda Tourism Authority were to go out tomorrow and try and purchase the same amount of TV coverage they got. So it clearly gave our tourism product a big boost across an incredible array of international markets, and I think that's the kind of exposure we expect to get, particularly when we get into 2017 as well.
Okay, and you mentioned that you didn't do a survey on local spending this time. Do you expect to do that for the main event?
Well, I think when we originally did our forecast back in October of 2014, almost a year and a half ago, I think we took the best data we had from other World Series and from other America's Cup events, Valencia, San Francisco, Auckland, New Zealand. So we were working with what had happened in other places. I think the issue here is, sorry, I've forgotten your question now.
The survey.
Yes.
You said there was no survey for local spending.
No, I think I'll let Peter answer that, but I think we had data from a number of different sources. I think the Chamber of Commerce, obviously, and other places, but I think some of the data came from credit card spending by the banks recorded, and that was do you want to address that? Sure.
No, so I think the essence of your question is at the end of this event in the future. Yeah. And so we have planned from the beginning that there would be a comprehensive economic impact assessment, and actually that would be across economic, social, and environmental impact, effectively. And there's an entire sub-working group of the America's Cup Bermuda organization, the Legacy and Sustainability Committee, that's co-chaired by Arthur Whiteman from PwC and Gary Medeiros, who are organizing that group to make sure that at the end we have an independent assessment of how this event impacted our community over the extended period. So yes, there will be a comprehensive assessment at the end.
Is this a snapshot of the week of the event, or is this for the year?
It's a snapshot only of the event itself. It does not attempt to capture revenues in through the economy from rentals or the teams being occupying Bermuda and so forth. So this is just a snapshot of how did that event perform versus our expectations.
I was going to say, you may have noticed if you looked at the order papers, but I'm going to be giving an update statement on the America's Cup in the House tomorrow, and that will take a slightly broader view in addition to the week of the Louis Vuitton that Peter is referring to.
You mentioned earlier this week, this month, that it cost $14 million last year to support the America's Cup ongoing. Is there any correlation between that figure and the 8.6 million profit?
Sure. I think what you've got to think about is what is in that $14 million. Part of what is in there was a sponsorship contribution, which is $15 million over the 3 years. In addition, there was a grant that the ACBDA has in terms of operating and assisting with things like the World Series, but also Peter mentioned, I think there are some 16 different working committees which are all out there as well. In addition to that, there's capital costs involved in preparing the South Basin up there, particularly the space for the team bases for Oracle, Team Japan. We have to prepare the dock. They build the facility. There are issues related to putting in fenders for the boats. There are a whole series of things that are going to be sort of what I'll call infrastructure investments that in the long term we hope will also be a good, or have a good return as well. So that's part of the spend over the next few years. Yeah.
Final question, please. Part of the 77 million is an estimate that you're going to do much better with the promotion of sponsorship. Has that indicated any development in the first tranche of this year?
Well, I think it'd be fair to say that we said at the very beginning that there would be a reconciliation at the end of the 2.5 years. And one of the reasons for that is because a number of these commercial sponsorship things have performance factors in there as well in terms of sales they might have or other issues. So it's a moving target in many respects. And I think at this point, it's still a little early to say where we are. I think a couple months ago I said that of the 25 million that was in there, we're below 20 at this point. But how far below would be difficult to determine at this point, which is why we said it's going to be a reconciliation at the end of the 2.5 years. But suffice it to say that based on what we've seen with the Louis Vuitton, we think we're getting great value for money in terms of the investment we're putting in and what we're getting back out, which is being spent in the community.
Jonathan, looking ahead to the main event, will there be some sort of review of what vendors are being charged? Because I understand that because of the high fee, I think it was around $600 to have your vendor at the event. They were forced to raise the prices of some goods. For example, popcorn was put up to $9. Will there be some sort of review to see if maybe that price can be decreased for vendors to take part?
Well, I think it'd be fair to say that we're currently in the process of essentially doing the planning for the event village, which is not going to be on Front Street, but it's going to be up in Dockyard. That's the 9 acres of reclaimed land up there in addition to the South Basin dock. So there were a couple of public meetings a little while ago just looking at the broader planning issues there, but I think some of these other issues as to where everything will be and who will be there and the rest of it I think is still to be determined. You'd be aware that the selection committee included not only the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, the small business group, but also the Chamber of Commerce and others. So I suspect that they will have an input into what fees are charged or not charged. And I think that's, I guess what I'm saying is a lot of those issues are still to be determined, but I'm sure, yeah.
Let me take a crack at that just at a little bit more granular level. Two points I guess I would make. One is what the vendors got for their $600 was not just the right and ability to show up, but they got infrastructure. They got support in terms of tents, tables, and all of the things necessary to power and all those good things. So that's important. And secondly, even if you just do the rough math and you say, it costs, call it $30,000, $35,000 for all of the vendors who participated to pay their fee. One of the numbers that I gave out was over $320,000 in revenue generated for those same vendors, a factor of 10 times. And I don't know about you, but if I'm going to invest $1 and get 10 back, that's a pretty good deal. So I think actually from the feedback that we got from the vast majority of the vendors that it was a very good experience for them.
Do you know that the Marion Bermuda Yacht Race has changed its date so it can be here in June next year?
Yes, we had heard that. I think there's a lot of logistical planning going on. In fact, as you're probably aware, the tall ships will be here as well for the 150th anniversary of the Canadian Federation. So it's going to be very busy in Hamilton, St. George's, and Dockyard. But I think it'll be a great party, I suspect.